Hey everyone, Marky here, and in today's video we're going to be talking about the Fuji X100V. You've definitely heard of this camera if you're a photographer. You've seen it on social media. Today I'm going to be talking about whether it's worth buying in 2023. I'll give you the short answer. Yes, but with some caveats. So when I bought this camera, it was around 2 years ago, back in 2020. I believe it was in May. I'll share the receipt right here. And when I bought that camera, it was, I believe, $1,400. Fast forward to today, it's $2,000, which is pretty insane for a 2-year-old camera.
Why?
Usually for cameras of that age, they decrease in value. With the X100V, it's actually held its value, and in fact, it's actually gone up. And so it's become this investment, which is pretty well to see for a camera. Now, before I tell you what the caveats are before buying this camera, because I did say yes, it's worth buying in 2023, I do want to give you my history with Fuji, because I've been a Fuji user since 2016, close to 7-8 years now, and I've owned all kinds of Fuji cameras. And so my first Fuji camera was the X-E2, which is kind of like a smaller version of the X100, and then I went to go get the X-T2. Then I got the X-H1 because it was more video focused and I was doing more video. Then I got the X-T3 and the X-T4, and then fast forward to 2020, that's when I got the X100V. And so I've had my fair share of Fujifilm cameras, and they all kind of have very similar pros and cons. I'll go and give you guys kind of like the broad pros and cons list of Fujifilm cameras. And let's go and start with the pros. One you'll hear a lot in the Fujifilm community is that the color science is really good. And so when you take these photos like straight out of camera, they look amazing. And then the other thing is that it's a small form factor. When Fujifilm came out, they were competing against the DSLRs of the world. DSLR versus mirrorless. There was this huge debate which one was better. And when these little, when the Fujifilm X line came out, DSLRs were still really popular. Mirrorless cameras were just coming out. But it created this niche where, oh, got something in my eye, sorry. Fujifilm created this niche of like enthusiasts. They love photography for what photography is. When you talk to the community, a lot of these people that own a Fujifilm camera, they describe it as a fun experience. It doesn't feel like work, especially my X100V. Like every time I pick it up, I feel like I'm playing with a toy, and that's a good thing. And in fact, I'm actually going to talk about that later. But anyways, yeah, that goes back to the small form factor too. You're not, messing up your shoulders because you're carrying two 1DXs. No offense to all the 1DX owners. In fact, my best friend has a 1DX. But I love the small camera of a Fujifilm. And then of course, a lot of photography enthusiasts love this, especially film photographers. Fujifilm is very tactile with the button layout and just how the camera feels. It feels like a film camera. I've taken my Fujifilms to festivals, and you can't bring any professional cameras at festivals, but the security guards would look at it and just, they would see it's like a film camera, and they'd let me bring it in, and I'll be taking all these concert photos without like without a pass. Which also brings me back to the film simulations. Fujifilm is very unique for these simulations. I've seen other cameras do it. I just feel like Fuji nails it really well. And a lot of people that shoot Fuji will talk about this. Like, it brings them back, right? It brings them back to the film days. Fujifilm as a brand, they just know colors. They have a history of colors. They created their own film. And so obviously they're going to know their colors really well. I would say that's a broad list of pros for the general Fuji line. Now the cons, there's of course there's a lot too. One being that the autofocus is really slow, and especially during the early cameras like the X-T1 and all these older lenses, like they were so slow that I would not be confident taking it to my professional work. It wasn't until maybe the X-T2 or even the X-T3 where I was like, okay, I feel confident that I'll be able to nail the shot. And so for the longest time, it was very hard to trust Fuji with the autofocus. It's also known for its, poor low light performance. The noise performance I get from Fuji, it's like I wouldn't trust it more than 4000 ISO. Anything after that, it doesn't really look that good. That's something to think about. It's like if low light is important to you, Fujifilm might not be it. But for me, it's okay. Shooting at 4000 ISO and under is like, that's the type of photography I do anyway. Because of the small form factor, you do have poorer battery life, and so my friends that shoot weddings and professional work, they're carrying like 7 batteries because the battery performance isn't that great. You know, that's actually changed with the more recent cameras like the X-T4 and the X-T5 and the X-H2. Like their battery performance is actually really good now. But before that, like I have a ton of, you know, X-T3 batteries that I have. I used to have a battery grip, but then that would kill the reason why I got Fuji in the first place, which was the form factor. It's kind of like the broad pros and cons of Fuji. And so when I was looking at the X100V, that's what I was thinking about. I wanted to know if they would like improve on any of the cons. And in fact, I'm remembering a time when I first was introduced to the X100 line. It was at a wedding. My friend Daryl, he had the very first X100. And it blew my mind when I saw it, because I was looking at this camera and I was like, oh, that's a nice, you know, it's a nice looking camera you got there. It's like, I love the aesthetics of it. You know, what kind of film camera is that? And he goes, it's not a film camera, it's a digital camera. I was like, what? Let me see that, you know? And so I was playing around with it. I was like taking photos, and you can review it and then you can delete it. I'm like, wow, this looks like a freaking film camera. And in that moment, like I was very interested. Again, this is the first X100, so there was a ton of iterations. I did a ton of research, and you know, I realized that there's a lot of flaws that I wouldn't be comfortable having if I owned this camera. A lot of those were pretty big to me, so I didn't end up getting the X100. The F was very close, but then the X100V came out, and a lot of the new features were very promising. A lot of the upgrades were very promising, and so I rented the X100V at Borrow Lenses for 2 weeks. I wanted to see what it was about. After those 2 weeks, needless to say, they fixed a lot of those problems, and I was very confident in buying this camera. As I said previously, I wanted to see if they'd work on these cons, mainly the autofocus and a sharper lens. They fixed both of those. The autofocus for sure, you know, for some people it might not be the fastest still, but for the way I shoot, like, I'm totally fine with it. I'm not like an autofocus hog or anything like that, but you know, it's enough for my needs. Before it was unusable. I wouldn't think about bringing it to a wedding. I shoot weddings with it all the time now. In fact, it's my favorite camera at weddings. I love doing the getting ready shots where it's non-obtrusive and you know, it's very quiet moments. It'd be very hard to do it with other cameras because those cameras are a little bigger, they're a lot more intimidating. And not just for weddings, like it's my everyday carry camera. Like it's so small, I could just stick this in the bag. I can't stick it in my pocket, and I'm okay with it. I'm not gonna lie, I like showing out this camera. Put it right here, you know, and just let it sling, but small enough where I could bust it out and take a photo on the street, bust it out, take a photo of some friends, and it just feels very casual. It's just become part of my daily life now, just to document things, and it's the reason why I shoot photography, is to document. You know, I do it for work sometimes, but like, I just want memories, and shooting with this camera allows me to capture those memories like effortlessly. Now, I don't want to list all the specs because you could totally look it up online, but I will list out some of my favorite features of this camera and some like that are just very underrated. The first thing is the built-in ND filter. That thing helps me shoot outdoor portraits like wide open, f2, and it saves my butt a lot of the times, especially when I'm shooting weddings, because you don't have the whole day to go find a location. Sometimes you have to shoot on the spot. Sometimes you're shooting in harsh daylight. You have to work with what you got. The second thing is the digital teleconverter. You know, a lot of people don't really talk about this because when they think of a digital teleconverter, they think of like just the camera getting cropped in, and it totally is that. Like you get a 50mm crop and a 70mm crop. But what really changed the game for me was they released an update where you can take the photos that you got on your digital teleconverter and edit them in raw format. I haven't tried this yet, but I do want to get the teleconverter, I think it's like the 50mm TCL teleconverter or whatever. Pair that with the digital teleconverter, and in theory, you could have close to like an 85mm lens with the f2 from that teleconverter. If anyone that has owned the camera has tried this, please let me know and let me know what the results are, if it looks good. Another thing that is like super fun about this camera is that it has very close focal distance. I'm shooting macro photos with this camera. In fact, most of my detail photos that I take for weddings, I'm shooting up close with this X100V. Now, would I recommend this camera in 2023? As I mentioned earlier, yes, with some caveats. The caveats being, if only you could find one for cheap or used. I don't know if I'd buy one at $2,000. That's pretty expensive for a 2-year-old camera. But for $1,500, $1,600 on eBay, Facebook Marketplace, I'll totally snatch it if you can. Again, it's still hard to get, and for good reason. Don't know when they're gonna make a new one. You know, it's 2 years old now. They might be in the works. They might. I'm sure they're seeing the sales of this X100 line and thinking to themselves like, okay, this is a good camera. We gotta start thinking about the new one, or at least make some more 100Vs. Like, it's just ridiculously overpriced right now because of social media and, you know, all the coverage it's getting. But it's a darn damn good camera. Like, I don't think I'll see myself selling this anytime soon. Maybe for another 3 or 4 years, unless the new X100 comes out and I'm blown away. But, you know, I'm just so used to this camera already. The 35mm length is like my favorite now because of this. Maybe if they do some new video stuff, but really, I don't think I'll be selling this camera. I'm gonna be keeping this for a while. In fact, I just know like 4 friends that picked one up because of how inspiring it is to use, and they've told me like whenever they shot my camera, they loved it. And again, going back to what I said earlier, it's how the camera makes you feel, right? It's the intangibles. It's not just the hardware. You want to shoot a camera because you enjoy photography. This camera right here, it makes me enjoy photography all the time. I don't want to feel like I'm working, especially when I'm off the clock. I want to be able just to bust this out, capture a few, you know, snaps with my own artistry, and call it a day. And with the X100V, I'm able to do that. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed that little review. It's been 2 years since I've had the camera. Still highly recommend it if you can get it for even a little cheaper. Like, I would totally pick one up if you can. Hope you subscribe, like, and subscribe. I make a lot of content like this. I talk about cameras, photography, creativity, and yeah, I hope you have a great day today. Peace.